Hello, so welcome to something a little bit different. I am going to be talking through a used PC that I built for just £300, and it can play most modern games and at high ultra settings at 1080p or 1440p for just about £300. So the first plan of it was to actually figure out what I was going to do, because the reason I was building this was because my girlfriend's stepdad, he works in a place where they throw out a lot of office PCs. And as you've seen many YouTube videos of people converting office PCs into gaming PCs, because it's quite a good market. And my friend needed a gaming PC, so I thought, I can get him a good start here to then move into PC gaming. So the budget was £300, and they already had partly a system available. So I went to collect the PC. His name is Paul, and Paul decided to try and turn it on. He said there was just a constant beep and it never really turned on. And I thought, well, that could be many things, but if it's not got the RAM or anything, it might not work. Luckily I was right. When I got the system and had a look, it had no RAM in it and no storage. Now this is quite common practice to remove storage and sometimes RAM from businesses, so they can't, like, anything can be data mined from it, so it's all safe and everything. So I thought, okay, now I've got the issue of the beeping, it's probably the RAM. So I first put in my 8GB Patriot stick while looking at the motherboard manual online, putting it in the original slot, and it was still beeping, and I was like, okay, this one won't work. I then tried to use the 4GB I had, because I originally bought a old HP machine from Cash Converters, and it had a 4GB stick that was a HP stick, and I knew it worked with HP systems. Plugged it in, immediately booted up, was fine. It showed the RAM, and when I plugged in the other 8GB next to it, works fine. So that means I have a good system and I had a good base to start with. It was a 4570 i5, so a 4th gen i5 is getting quite old nowadays. It had a HP special motherboard with proprietary connectors, 240-watt power supply, CPU cooler that was adequate, let's say, and a small form factor restricted case. Also a DVD drive if you care about that kind of thing. So I needed to plan out what I was going to do with this system. So the first thing I wanted to do was I needed a good graphics card. Ideally I needed something small form factor that was cheap, but I couldn't actually think of anything at the time other than the 1650 that didn't require external power and was small form factor, because a lot of the time the cheaper 1650s are actually full size. So I was thinking maybe a 1050 Ti, but again they're not that powerful nowadays, and some of them are full, like not small form factor. So I thought, okay, I definitely need a GPU, and I'll come to that later. I think the first thing I need is RAM. I need RAM that works, because 12 gigs is just not great. So I went on Amazon and I bought 16GB of this Gigastone DDR3 1600 megahertz for £30. I could have scoured eBay, but I read the reviews and I knew this worked with HP systems. So I thought, I'll bite the bullet. If it doesn't work with the HP system, I can always refund it. I don't need to worry about that. It did work, but I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. The thing I wanted, which I knew I needed, was a new CPU. As much as the 4570 is going to be good, if I want to hit 1080p higher settings, I need a better CPU. The best CPU this motherboard officially supports is a 4770. And I thought a 4770 4-core 8 threads, it's got the best I'm going to get. So that's what I'm going to go for. So before I got the RAM, I actually made a decision. Bringing up the old HP I had before, I actually had an old Dell case, an old HP case. It was it could fit full-size graphics cards in it, so I made a decision that this old case, it's small form factor and it's limiting. So what I'm going to do is just swap it out of that and put it in this bigger case that I have lying around. In hindsight, I wouldn't have done that. Firstly, because it's a HP special machine, so there is no backplate. The cooler screws directly into the back of the case, and this one is the new case that it has doesn't have that solving issue. So I'll tell you how I'll solve that later on. So I'll put that in. Also, I had to actually cut up the front of the case because this has 4 USBs and the new one has only 2. The old case only has 2. The power button didn't work properly, so I had to cut that and make a new power button. And yeah, it was a bit of a hassle, and I probably shouldn't have done it that way. So I then moved on to installing the OS. So I had a 120 gig SSD lying about, and I had a 1 terabyte hard drive lying about, and I thought those two are perfect. I'll have a nice fast boot drive for him and mass storage. Got an installation of Windows, put it in, and I had an issue where, first of all, it wouldn't want to boot to the USB, and because it was an old business system, it decided that it would never boot. They basically set the BIOS so it can't boot into a USB. So I had to remove all of them safety procedures, and then when I booted and installed Windows, it installed Windows with their version of Windows. So it's like, welcome to this company, please use the company email. I went through many BIOS settings, and I went through Googling, and I thought at that point I may as well just give up, because there was no way I could change it, no matter what security methods I changed and everything. Luckily I did Google it, and after a few hours of Googling, I figured out that it's serial number locked to the old company. So it's serial number locked. Luckily HP, actually in the BIOS you can change the serial number, so what I did was I just removed it, reinstalled Windows, and it worked perfectly. Windows is fine. It's also activated, so it uses the old activation that the company had, but it uses its own version of Windows now, so I could go with an offline account on Windows Pro, and it worked perfectly. So at this point I had got the storage sorted, I needed the RAM next, which was my big plan. So like I said, I got 16 gigs of Gigastone of 1600 megahertz for £30 off Amazon. Came next day, worked perfectly, sorted. So I didn't have to use the 4 and 8 gig stick anymore. I could just remove them and leave them for testing later on with other systems. So I moved on. So and then I needed firstly I needed a way to attach the CPU cooler, because it doesn't attach to the back of the case anymore. I looked in my tool of goodies, and I had motherboard standoffs, little tiny ones that had basically maybe like a millimetre of actual screw-in depth. And I thought to myself, hang on, I can use this on the back of the motherboard. So what I did was I screwed the cooler onto the standoffs. It was screwing on tight enough to keep the temperatures low. It didn't short anything, and I did a lot of testing, like moving it about, not with the hard drive in, but with just like the other systems, moving it about a bit. Completely fine, worked perfectly, no shorting, nothing. And I was like, great. And this is why in hindsight I would have kept with the small form factor system and just worked on getting a small form factor graphics card. It would have been so much more simple. But then I realised I need two things now. I'm going to test it with this current CPU to see if it is any good, but I need a GPU, and that was my next step. So I went on eBay and I looked at 1650s, I looked at 1050 Ti's, and I also, those were my main two. I looked at a GT 1030, but I thought it's got to be too weak. The 1650s and the 1050 Ti's were actually very similar prices, between £50 and £150. The small form factor ones were usually slightly more expensive, and I thought, as much as I like the 1650 and I like the 1050 Ti, I saw a video a few months ago from a YouTube channel called Random Gaming in HD, talking about the NVIDIA Quadro, or I don't think it's a Quadro, NVIDIA RTX A2000. This is basically a 1050 that doesn't require external power. So I thought, will be perfect. It's a powerful system. It's a powerful little graphics card, and it fits in basically anything because it comes in a small form factor bracket and everything. So I originally found one that was listing for $250. So I sent an offer for $225 because I thought, $225 is not that far off. He then declined it within the hour, turned off the ability to send offers, and raised the price to £300. So he lost the sale because I wasn't going to pay that. I refused to, and I went on the search to continue. I then came across this nice little graphics card for the same graphics card, but for $239. Didn't come with a box or anything, but it's $239. So it was actually cheaper than the original one at $250, because I was just going to pay $250 for it since he declined my $225 before he raised it to $300. Didn't make the same mistake of trying to leave an offer. I just bought it for $240, $239.99, and it got shipped, and it was beautiful. This is the star of the show. This A2000 is incredibly good value for performance per watt, and it was beautiful. So then I looked on eBay for a 4770. They were all around 20 to 30 quid. Now, if I spent some time bargain hunting and looking for something that was better value, I probably could have got a better price, but I put a bid on a 4770 for £28. A little bit high, because if I took my time, I probably could have found one for £15-20. But I just wanted to get this done. Paid $249 shipping, $349 shipping actually. Took a while to come actually, but it did come. Worked fine, and we're going to go into the testing now, and I think you'll be very, very surprised. So Forza Horizon 5 at 1080p ultra settings. In the free roam, I managed to basically not drop below 60. It was hitting 70s and 80s, but in the official benchmark, it got an average frame rate of 45.9 FPS with 1% low of 33 and a 0.1% low of 30. That is a very solid result. So the difference between frames isn't actually that much, so it's quite consistent. And I thought, you know what, we're still a bit CPU bound, so maybe if we throw it a bit forward, try 1440p. That one was even more impressive. That actually ran at about 50-60 FPS in free roam, but then with the official benchmark, I got an average FPS of 39.4 with a 1% low of 31 and a 0.1% low of 27 FPS, which was amazing, and I am so happy with this system in Forza. That was 1440p ultra settings preset. Beautiful. So with Cyberpunk at 1080p high, I got, on the official benchmark, I got a frame rate of 47 FPS with a 1% low of 32 and a 0.1% low of 25. Very, very playable, ran very, very well, and I thought again, I could probably increase the settings. I did turn motion blur off for both of these results, but then I went to 1440p medium settings. I felt like high would have been a bit too ambitious, so I went down. The average frame rate for this was 34 with a 1% low of 25 and a 0.1% low of 22. So it wasn't actually that different between 1080p and 1440p, showing a CPU bottleneck still. In Forza we're still using around 100% CPU, and in Cyberpunk we're still using about 100% CPU. I did have low crowd density for Cyberpunk, so if we got a new CPU, if we put this graphics card in a better system, it would actually probably run off quite a bit better. But for what it was doing really, really well. And yeah. Now Call of Duty was even more impressive. I ran it at 1080p with the high preset with motion blur off, and I got 71 FPS average in the inbuilt benchmark with a 1% low of 39 and a 0.1% low of 33. Again, we were CPU bound. It said at the end, it's 75% of the time we were CPU bound, but we got 71 FPS average, which was really, really good. But I did decide to try 1440p again with the exact same settings, 1440p high, and we managed to get an average of 62 FPS with a 1% lower 35 and a 0.1% lower 30. So the frame rate didn't actually move that much because we were CPU bound at the end of the day. So that shows how powerful this system actually is. So this system overall was fantastic. It ran the most demanding games I could throw at it, the best games, because I wanted to try Cyberpunk because it brings computers to its knees. I wanted to try COD because it runs fairly well, and Forza is a very well optimized, pretty game, so I wanted to try that as well. All of these came out really, really well. Like I said, Forza in free roam was 60 plus FPS. Didn't try Cyberpunk. I did actually try Cyberpunk in free roam, and I ended up turning on DLSS, and that gave us a plus 60 FPS in free roam driving. Now, when we got closer to the center, we dropped because obviously, again, we were CPU bound, but that was in the 40s. Call of Duty, I had some issues with it after the benchmark. I couldn't launch it, but reformatting Windows worked with that. But yeah, this was a beautiful system. It cost me £301, and it runs every game. It was magical. I couldn't actually believe how well everything ran. But yeah, I hope you liked the video, and I'm sure I'll see you in the next one because I have some more PCs coming through, and I think we're gonna keep doing this. So yes, goodbye.